All right, everyone. As promised, we are bringing Dominick Quartuccio back on the show. By far, one of our most popular guests. He's actually been on the show twice. One where we really talked about this idea of the drift state, and another episode where we talked about designing your future. And those episodes were incredibly popular with the community at large. People have talked for years now about how it had an impact on their trajectory. But I think now, 2020, 2021, right now, coming on the heels of what has to be the biggest slap in the face that you could imagine for what you knew was going to happen in 2020. I think all of us sometimes feel like we've lost a little bit of agency. And in this episode, we're going to take a look at what does it look like, not to design the rest of your life, but what about this next year? How do we bounce back? Welcome to the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. This is ChooseFI.
You're listening to ChooseFI Radio. The blueprint for financial independence lives here. If you're looking to unlock the secrets to financial independence and early retirement, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and join a community of like-minded people who are getting off the hamster wheel and taking control of their lives in the pursuit of financial independence. ChooseFI, your home for financial independence online.
Excited to hop into this week's episode, bring Dom back on the show. And Brad, I know Dom is someone that has really been a source of inspiration that you've drawn some strength from over the last several years and really kind of been a mentor for you. I'm excited to kind of hear your thoughts about this episode.
Yeah, no, you hit it right in the head. Dom has been a really important part of my life these last handful of years. We actually knew each other, as I mentioned before. We knew each other back in college, 20 plus years ago, but we just kind of reconnected a handful of years ago, and we have done actually a monthly call, which is really awesome, just to kind of connect and just talk in depth. And what's cool is we never have an agenda. It's just these wide-ranging conversations. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate Dom just being a part of my life personally and being such an important part of ChooseFI. He's actually our first 4-time guest. So I know we said 3, but he was actually on an episode earlier this year in the midst of the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So this is actually the 4th time. And I'm just really excited because we talk about really setting our intentions, right? Like we talk about how much of the journey to FI is psychological. And I think what's cool is today, Jonathan, you and I are going to get run through here an exercise that Dom has that I think really the entire community, everybody listening to this can relate to. So we're going to be on the hot seat, and hopefully people hear this, they slow down, they pause, and they answer the questions and design the next year of their own lives. I think that's the real intention here. So Dom, with that, welcome back to ChooseFI.
Oh, it's great to be back for the 4th time. I didn't realize I had such an exalted status of being the first full 4-time guest. I think we cleared it up before we started recording that Jonathan is only getting the hypothetical questions. Brad, you're going to be doing all the work.
Yeah,
just design your future. So just want to make sure we're all clear on that.
All those nice things I said about you, Dom.
That's a great question, Dominic. Brad, what are your thoughts on that?
That's not how it rolls around here, my friends.
Dom, I did a little setup at the beginning of the episode, basically saying, as a world, as humanity, we're all coming through something together. It has just been pretty much equally rough. Very few people have truly been spared from this. I don't know if you're talking about health, you're talking about the economics, you're talking about the uncertainty, the anxiety. In some capacity, no one has come through unscathed. And I'd like for you just to kind of give us back to you and kind of give us a framework for what we're trying to accomplish today.
Right on, man. One of the biggest concepts that we've talked about in previous conversations is this conversation around drift, right? That state of existence where we think we're making intentional decisions about our lives, but in actuality, it's our habits, patterns, belief systems, unconscious insecurities, feelings, expectations, societal pressures, et cetera, that are the ones really flying our plane when our conscious mind is sitting in the cattle car, right? And those unconscious belief systems and patterns are flying us to destinations unknown or destinations we don't want to go. And usually it's only when an outside force thrusts itself upon us do we wake up from that state of drift. And you guys remember, like when we talked about it before, those outside forces are usually something pretty dramatic. It could either be a 2x4 across the head, or you get hit by a Mack truck. Oftentimes it's like losing a loved one or losing a job or some unexpected illness. In this case, we're talking about a global pandemic, right? Now, for the first time in human history, the entire world has been going through and experiencing something at the same exact time where we're all aware of it, right? Because of our technology, we're communicating with one another. Like every part of this world pretty much is experiencing some form of this pandemic. In a strange sense, it's unifying in that regard. And there's been a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. And Jonathan, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like to some degree, all of us have felt some semblance of pain, whether it's losing a loved one or a business or financial security, something along those lines. Now, in the short term, these kinds of pains can be paradoxical. Like why should we have to go through this? Why us? Let's look at all the reasons why they shouldn't be happening. But I'm also here to say most of us have gone through experiences in our past, trials and tribulations, that while going through them, it felt like pure suffering. But when we look back on them, those happen to be the moments that made us the men and the women that we are today. And we wouldn't change those experiences. So we have that same opportunity right now, instead of discarding this entire year and saying do over. Let's get this year's finished as fast as possible and race to the finish line of, so we can get to 2021 already. I would actually encourage us to pause and take a look back over this past year to see where you've been, to highlight standout moments. This is part of the exercise we're going to do today, so that we can actually envision a year in 2021 that has the potential to be the most meaningful, fulfilling, and prosperous year of your life, if you believe that there's the potential for that to happen.
All right. Well, I am game. Now, I tell you what, for our audience, I feel like you're going to try and make this interactive for us. What sort of conditions can we put in place to make this interactive for the audience that's listening to this, so they're not just listening to our answers, but they're actually doing some work alongside? Let's do some inner work, Dom.
Heck yeah, man. And you know what, Jonathan, on that point about inner work, and then I'll put the conditions down, is over the last 8 months of having gone deep into the inner lives of people, that's my role as a leader of businesses, a leader of men and women. I've had a chance to see behind the curtain in people's personal lives. And there is a distinct difference between people who have had an inner foundation, a foundation of inner work leading up to this pandemic, and people who have never done inner work. Your community, by the very nature of how you've laid it down over these last 3 or 4 years, it's not just been about the finances. Like you have very intentionally, you two, from the very beginning, one of the biggest personal development experiences you could ever go on, that 5 path. And so your community is more bulletproof, right? It has a sturdier foundation than a lot of others who haven't done the inner work. So what we're about to do is fortify your inner foundation so that if there are tougher times for the year ahead, you can still be strong, you can still thrive. So fellas, when I start asking you questions, there's going to be 2 parts to this design the next year of your life component. We're going to be looking back at the year you just had, and then we're going to look forward at creating the future you want. And in both of those situations, whenever I ask you two a question, I will also make sure that we have the listeners. I will be prompting the listeners to say, here's how you would modify, or here's how you would be going about this at home as well.
Should people, I mean, if they have a notebook, if we're not driving right now, should we be taking notes as we go? I mean, is that something along those lines?
Absolutely. Like ideally, if you could be listening to this, whether it's now or like a re-recording later, pen, paper, reflective exercises. And I would say those of you who are listening have the benefit of being able to pause this. And like when I ask questions, pause and actually spend a few minutes writing. Whereas Jonathan and Brad are going to be forced to sit in the hot seat right now and spew.
I'm writing.
Yeah.
I'm writing. And Brad's answering first. So I'm writing. No.
Hey, Tom, quick question for you. In there, you're, for people unfamiliar, you're talking about inner work. You also use the phrase personal development.
Yeah.
Are they synonymous in your mind? Like, how would someone describe and define inner work?
I would put inner work as a subset, like a niche underneath the personal development umbrella, right? So personal development is basically any series of behaviors or skills that you're acquiring to better yourself. And personal development could also be like external skills, maybe learning how to like manage your bookkeeping better, or reading books that can teach you a skill that you can apply in the real world. Inner work is something more inwardly oriented, along the lines of, what is your purpose in this lifetime? What lights you up inside? What lights your soul on fire? Who are you when you're at your best? So that when the conditions of the outside world change, like when you lose your money, when the world has a pandemic, when you lose your loved ones, if you've done the inner work, you can feel shaken, but you don't feel like the whole floor, the whole world has been ripped out from underneath you. You're standing on something stable. that make sense?
Certainly does.
Jonathan, does that make sense to you, my friend?
It does. Yeah, I wanted to see what Brad said first. He's like, I'll do all the
Sign of
yes, no
things to come.
questions. That's fine. We're good.
Okay, cool.
Hey, this is Andrew from the ChooseFI team. I hope you're enjoying the show. We're going to get right back to it after these quick messages.
One of the things that we often forget to do as we race towards a finish line of a year is to reflect on where we've been. You know, Maya Angelou once said, how can you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been? And oftentimes, like, we race towards the finish line of a year without reflecting on where we've been. And this is a year, it's more incumbent upon us to look at where we've been this year than any other year, because we've experienced some of the most emotional turmoil of our lives. Here in the United States also, we've gone through an election that's been polarizing for a lot of people. So there's a lot of stuff going on in our inner worlds and in our external worlds that's worth introspecting upon. So here's an exercise that's going to be much easier for your listeners and going to be for the two of you, because they're going to have an opportunity to stop, pause, and like look at this stuff. But I want to give you a few places that you can look back on this year, because sometimes you forget how much can go down in an entire year. So the first thing I would say is we want to look back over this past year for what I categorize as your standout moments. Okay, what were your standout moments from this past year? And what I mean by that is, what were some of the highs and lows of this year? What were some of the beginnings and endings? What were some births, new children, new relationships in your life? Were there some deaths and endings? Did you lose somebody in your life? Or did you stop being friends with people? Did you start a new job? Did you end a job? What were some of your triumphs this year and tribulations? And I'm giving you, Jonathan and Brad, an opportunity to kind of figure those things out as I ask these questions. So if you start to think about these contrasts of the past year, the standout moments, there's typically some real clues as to the journey that you went on. Now, here's the benefit of your listeners: to give you 3 mechanisms to really go deep in unpacking your standout moments of this year. I want you to, number 1, look at your calendar. Go back to January 1st of this year, look at your calendar. Whether you keep like a hard copy calendar or you have a digital calendar, you'd be amazed at how many standout moments that you missed. Maybe travel that you had during January and February before lockdown, you know, the meetings that you had this year, who you had meetings with. Like, it will trigger some real memories. The second way to look back is to go onto your phone and look through your photo reel from the last, 10 or 11 months. I see Brad smiling. But maybe you don't have Brad, does your phone even have a photo reel? I don't even know what phone you're using.
You're going to call out my flip phone on my show?
If you have so most of us who take photos on our phones, it's surprising those moments of where you've been, like those moments that you maybe forgot when you had that first, quarantine dinner, whether you're on your own or like, there's some real standout moments that we've forgotten that are probably captured in your phone. And the third place to look, if you are a journaler, if you're someone who keeps notes somewhere, or even if you're not a journaler, but if you take notes on like your iPad or somewhere on your phone, take a scroll through your notes and you'll have an opportunity to see what you were thinking, what you were seeing, what your attitude was. And once you've had a chance to look back over those, you can start to pick apart themes. Like, what were the themes of your 2020 year? Was it bringing yourself back into balance? Was it perseverance? Was it loss? Was it heartbreak? Was it finding love? Was it finding what was most important? Start to pick out themes from this past year. Now, hopefully, fellas, by this point in time, I've bought you enough time to start to write down some of your own standout moments. And what I've learned is that Jonathan likes to go first when we ask these kinds of questions. So, Jonathan, what are some of your standout moments from this past year?
No, it was super helpful. You kind of giving me a few of the ways to look at that. Obviously, I can't go back through my timeline at this particular moment and write everything down, but kind of the framework in terms of what we're going to be drawing from. I think I have a few things, and I even shared a couple of them on Friday, but now through the lens of this, it's kind of a big deal. So my wife and I got on the same page with kind of our work-life relationship this year in a big way. My wife has been helping put together the ChooseFI Foundation curriculum, and I've actually seen her embrace this idea of skill stacking. So
Yeah.
a lot of her identity up to this point was through the lens of, I'm a teacher who's not currently teaching. And literally as a result of her taking on this curriculum, she has kind of gone to a whole nother level of I'm just going to learn what I need to learn to be able to do what I want to do. And our ability and capacity to work next to each other, both of this kind of common direction, has really been a good thing. So that's like at a marital level. My kids have turned into different human beings. I mean, we're talking about a 3-year-old and a 15-month-old. They are different human beings every few weeks, but like I've and obviously with COVID, we're all at home together. So I've kind of working from home myself. I've really gotten the chance to be around them for all of that. So those are 2 personal wins. I didn't want to go too quickly to like the other things, but just kind of as we're working through these, a lot of relationship stuff going on there. Relationships with my dad. So I'll talk about this. So I personally found myself about 20 to 30 pounds over my target weight in March, and I've since lost that. We can talk about a win here. I have a check here from Healthy Wage. I did a bet with myself that I would lose that 20 pounds and keep it off for 6 months. I won $2,400. I'm going to cash this check today, probably right after this call. That's a massive win. But not only did I just do that for myself, I actually embraced the idea of community, and I started holding both my dad and JD Roth, a good friend of this community, accountable on their own weight loss journey on weekly calls. So I'm doing a weekly call with my father. He's now down 15 pounds. I can't remember the last time he did that. JD Roth is down 23 pounds. So these are relationships that got formed out of that. I watched my own business that I put my heart and soul into over the last 4 years. The economics of that thing, I watched it crater and income go down by some ridiculous percentage and then come back through completely different methods, completely different means, building totally new lines of revenue. And not just stopping there, I actually went out and built 2 new businesses that are phenomenal income streams and got those off the ground using the skills that I built over the last 4 years. Those are massive wins. It kind of took me from like, is this a lightning in a bottle entrepreneurship? Was it just luck to, no, I have a skill set that's highly valuable that I've put a lot of work and time into, and I can do this anywhere, any place, anytime now, which gives me a lot of security about what my path is going forward. And then there's a few other things, but I don't want to keep going, but that's what I've been sitting with this week. Worst year ever in many cases. At a personal level, my best year ever.
Jonathan, this is massive. And I would imagine that a lot of your listeners are feeling something similar where there's amazingly high highs and also disturbingly low lows. Like we're going to see a lot of contrast this year. Question for you would be, if 3 years ago you would have experienced the same explosion in your business, that cratering of your business that you talked about, how would you have handled it? Like, what was your inner structures 3 years ago? Would you have been able to build it back up the way that you did this time around?
No, nothing that I'm describing now would have existed 3 years ago at all. I would have been, yeah, totally. I mean, I'm literally a different human than I was 3 years ago. I don't even know how I would interact with that person now, what it would take to grow them there. There's, through the lens of what we're talking about now, they're just 2 different people.
2 totally different people. And you also ended up getting your health in order, your weight in order. You're also influencing your father in that respect. So not only did you experience some of the most turbulent times in your business, but you also maybe in the past would have let that affect your eating, affect your health, affect your sleeping. This year, you actually got stronger through that, right?
Definitely.
So like these are all things that you could very easily blow by and not give yourself enough credit for the growth that you've experienced over the last few years. And the thing that you said that is like the exclamation point on this is, whoa, I've learned that I can not only withstand this, but like in the future, I could do whatever it is that I want as a result of this, right? Like I've proven to myself in this year that I have grit, determination. I get stronger during times of turmoil. So I want to kind of put a pin in this because this is going to be where we're going next about like looking towards the future. But what I heard from you, Jonathan, is that like there's a newfound sense of confidence and belief in yourself. And also this year was a big theme of relationships that you drove deeper as well.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Cool. So what I would love to do for now is let you sit in the gratitude of that and just kind of bask in the glow of what you've accomplished this year. And we're going to want to carry that forward as we look towards next year as well. But I'm going to turn to Brad and see what came up for you, buddy.
Yeah, this is certainly a very interesting exercise. And I love that concept that you said before about like how the 3 ways people can think back on the year. Because I got to be honest, when you first said that, I'm like, my brain went blank. And I'm like,
yeah.
I have a very difficult time. My memory is not the world's greatest memory, but being able to look at your calendar, like what a cool thing. I'm actually, while Jonathan was talking, and I was listening, but I said no worries, but I was looking back at the calendar, and it's just so neat seeing some of these things. And I've talked about this on the podcast for months. My entire family, we were doing 5-day-a-week CrossFit classes together. I mean, that was one of the coolest things that we've ever done together as a family. And just to see it, I'm looking at the week of April 13th, and it's 9 a.m. Monday to Friday, Barrett Family CrossFit. And that's just a cool thing to be able to look back on your year, and maybe even a couple of years, right? For those of us who maybe say we don't have a great memory or whatever you want to call it, it's neat to be able to do that. And I guess the other ones were looking back at your photos and your notes in your journal. So those were very cool. And yeah, I mean, I think for me, that concept of togetherness is the theme that I'm kind of coming up with here. And what's so interesting is in a global pandemic where we can't be together, that's the word that encapsulates 2020 for me, is togetherness. That's pretty wild. Like, that's hard to believe. And it's not just with my nuclear family here, with the four of us. I mean, Dom, I'm in your Great Man Mastermind that we do every Thursday night. We get together with a group of 20, 22 men. And I mean, that's part of this togetherness. Right. I think about like and don't get me wrong, there have been highs and lows this year, and I'm certainly going to get to that. But I think about my parents, and my dad has had a catastrophic year health-wise. But in many ways, I think I've seen my parents more this calendar year, than any calendar year I can remember. Mm-hmm. And I mean, even now, as he's continuing to recover, I go over there every single day after I drop my daughter Anna off at swimming, and we take a walk. And I mean, that's really, really cool. And that's something that, we never did that. I mean, never. And it's neat when you can try to make lemonade out of lemons, or whatever the saying is. And how do you reach out, and how do you try to connect? So, I mean, there are all these ways, but yeah, I mean, I guess the highest of the highs, it's interesting how you can, again, it's taking these maybe negative things and turning them around. So my younger daughter, Molly, was just having some anxiety actually with swimming. And this was a big part of her life. And I think she was experiencing anxiety, just period. And it kind of exhibited itself when it came to swimming. And her and I, we spent probably 30 minutes a day kind of just talking. Like, she would just say, "Daddy, I need to talk." And we'd go, lay down in her room, and I would just be there to listen. And, some of the things that I've learned on my own personal development journey and overcoming some degree of anxiety myself, like, I was there for her. And it was really cool to see those, I don't know, episodes, let's call them, just kind of slowly wane. And it wound up, the kind of full circle moment was, she very nearly quit swimming entirely, like to the point where the absolute deadline day for our summer swim, which we didn't think was going to happen anyway, but it did, which was wonderful. Like, she was on the fence about joining, and she wound up saying, "You know what, I'm going to do it, even if I just practice once a week." And what was really neat was to see her overcome this anxiety. And it was still there at the beginning. She would only go once or twice a week. By the end of the season, she had actually broken a 20-year team record in the butterfly.
Probably didn't hurt that you guys were doing 5 days of CrossFit. So true. But I mean, geez, and it's not about the accomplishment. I mean, the accomplishment for her was getting in the water that first time. But it was just like, it was such a cool family moment to just see her succeed, and like her big sister give her this huge, like, loving hug. It was amazing. I mean, so when I look back on 2020, like, that is the highest of the high. And it came from really like one of the lower points of her life. So, I mean, that was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, Brad, this concept of togetherness that you talked about, which comes in an ironic time where it seems like we're, at least physically speaking, we're distant from so many. But Jonathan, I also heard you talk about relationships and closeness also. Brad, I'll ask you this. Like, what is it that's been so meaningful and powerful for you about the time you spent with your family, whether it was 5 days of CrossFit a week or being there for your daughter during like one of these more emotionally challenging times of her life? What was so important for you about being there for that?
That's interesting. I haven't actually thought of what was so important. I mean, I think just the sheer fact that like we're this team, we all just trust each other so much. And like we're very open. My kids, even my older one who's 12 years old, and a lot of kids that age start kind of wanting to be on their own and not talk to their parents. Like they're just the most loving, open kids. And like it's just this amazing just like spirit that we have in the house. And like to see that it's easy in good times.
Sure.
I think this is for so many aspects of life. It's like things are good when things are good, right? Like it's easy, but man, when you face that adversity and to see us not only come through it on the other side, but come through it stronger and having leaned on each other that whole time, like it just really meant something. And it also, part of my most important job in life is just to raise good human beings. And it's just kind of neat seeing them grow up and really exhibit all these things that I've tried in my kind of, weird way to teach them over the years. And it's kind of just neat to see it come to fruition.
What you're talking about makes me think of the speed with which our lives were running before this year was warp, right? I mean, we were all moving 1,000,000 miles a minute, scheduling every second we possibly can to do something productive or build our businesses or whatever. And we miss those moments that you're talking about, like those pivotal moments of coming together, or those pivotal moments, Jonathan, for you of like reaching your father, in a different way, being there for your daughter, Brad, and seeing like everyone come out the other side stronger. I think that almost everyone that's listening to the show could have some sort of ability to relate to that like this has forced us to slow down and meet some of those moments. And this is an awesome opportunity to anchor in a conscious decision to say, if it's that important, to make a conscious decision to bring this forward into our future. Because like when things maybe start to speed back up again, are we going to default back to our old existence and just let like life take us on that ride? Or are we going to be the ones who push pause and say, I know what that feels like, but I also know what it feels like to really be there for those moments where I feel like a team and all my effort, like I could see it paying off, and the people who I love the most are closer to me now than ever before.
Yeah. And it's also just, again, like having that time like that. You're right. It's so interesting that like we're so used to going so fast. And then when you slow down, you realize like, wow, this is how I want to spend my time.
Yeah.
What was I doing? Why was I so busy, quote unquote, and it's very clarifying. I think in a lot of senses, 2020 has been very clarifying for me. So yeah, I think that's another word that comes up. And clearly this has not been all rainbows and unicorns, right? Like there's no question about that. I know the last time you were on at the beginning of the pandemic in episode 185, I talked about the anxiety that I had around just the uncertainty at that point in late March, early April of this pandemic. And I mean, that was a time, again, like to kind of go back to Annie Duke, who we had on the podcast recently, like, it's easy to look back in hindsight and say like, oh, what was I so worried about? And that's not to minimize clearly what's happened by any means, but like my brain, and this is what our brains do, right? Like they try to keep us safe. It's that lizard brain. It's what is the lion that's going to jump out behind that shrub or whatever? Like, we're constantly looking for the negative because our brain is trying to keep us safe. And I think that in a lot of senses was what was going on in my brain back then. Like I was thinking these terrible scenarios, like how can I safeguard my family? Like all of these things. And to see, just to live through that, not that you can ever vanquish some of these, mental like demons you have, because again, it's hardwired. Like I believe at least that a lot of that anxiety is evolutionarily hardwired into my brain, but to be able to come through it and to be open and really, publicly, very publicly open to the fact that I was experiencing that, but you were able to help me. A lot of other people were able to help me. And, I realized like, this is not serving me. Yep. And I think that obviously there are things that you can do to safeguard yourself. This is why we buy insurance, right? Like there's lots of things you can do in a very smart and intentional manner. But when your brain starts just freaking out, like that's not serving you. So, this is kind of what I talked about with my daughter, Molly, and all those talks is like, you kind of thank your brain and just say like, listen, I know you're trying to keep me safe, but by creating these negative hypotheticals, you're actually making my life bad in the present. Like right. You're locking in negativity for something that's not real. Right. And I mean, that helped me and it helped Molly as well.
One of the silver linings, Brad, that you're talking about here of this pandemic is it's shined a light on mental health in a way that's been needed for so long. Mental health and things like addressing issues around anxiety, depression, going to therapy. These are all things that are now starting to be looked at as cool, as like, that's a sign of strength if you're able to like witness that and observe that and talk about that and then go get support for that. So one of the other questions I would even ask you, your listeners to consider as we're going through this exercise is like, what did you learn about your own mental health this year? What did you learn about mental health in general? And some of your listeners may say like, man, I didn't realize anxiety was so present inside myself. I didn't realize how crippling it could feel, or I didn't realize that I was so prone to depression, or that I'm so prone to being angry and lashing out and fear driving my behavior. Whatever it is, like, what did you learn about mental health? Maybe this was the year that you made the decision to get therapy or to speak out and get support. These are all questions. Let me give you a few more questions and then we can turn it forward to looking at next year. These are just some other opportunities for your listeners to kind of really capture where they went this past year. Mental health was a big one. I would encourage your listeners to go back and say, like, what were the milestones of FI that they experienced over this past year? Maybe go through Brad's, 52 weeks of questions in the ChooseFI podcast Facebook group, where it's like, what's the one thing that you did? And if like you're religiously going in there, maybe you can go in and see the 45 or 50 from this year that like you added up, you'd be shocked at how many wins that you've had over the past year. What relationship emerged this year as the most important in your life? What did you discover about your physical well-being? There's so many different questions you can ask yourself to go back and look at where you've been. Now, before we wrap it up, I'll ask you guys the same questions I want your listeners to wrap up and go forward. What is something that you would want to leave behind in this year? Maybe there's like a belief system or an emotion or a way of being or a complaint, a recurring complaint you've had about your life or each other or the business. That's like, what? It's time to resolve this. It's time because I've been carrying it around this whole year, carrying it around the last 10 years of my life. I'm not good enough. I don't have enough money, whatever it is. What do you want to leave behind in 2020?
This is probably not one where I can give you, I think it's a great question. And I think it's one that like people, it's going to take some time to journal through that. It's probably easier to think about your wins, things that get you really excited because there's a reason you're really excited about them. Like everything I mentioned earlier, I'm really excited about it. I think for me, the big one, it's like an epiphany, but then that means something has to change. And so the epiphany was not every hour of my time is equally valuable. Not every action that I take actually moves me forward towards something. And to some degree, that's okay. But recognizing that fact says if you're spending 80% of your time doing stuff that doesn't matter, doesn't move your relationships forward, doesn't like, watching Netflix. I like Netflix. I have a Netflix subscription. I can't seem to cancel it. It'll probably never be canceled. It'll just stay there. Watching Netflix does not move my personal development forward in any way. None. There's not a single show on Netflix that is moving me forward from a personal development perspective. It just is a way of me burning through my most precious, non-renewable resource, my time, while making it to the next day. Social media scrolling is another one. Every morning you wake up with a routine and you check the Google News feed on the suggested search and you refresh it 5 times. Then you check your email, then you check Twitter, then you check Facebook, then you go back to email to see if it's updated. Then you check your 2 to 3 sites that you rely on because they give you the accurate news that you're not getting anywhere else. And then you go back through the cycle maybe one more time. And then you're like, all right, it's time to go get breakfast. That's the bit, I still have accomplished so much in spite of recognizing that I have that limitation. That's the bit that I want to leave behind.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that no one be informed, and there you could make the case, well, you got to keep up with what's going on in the world. But that's the piece that, man, if you could just cut the stuff that you recognize doesn't add value and replace that with 1 or 2 activities that do, whatever that is, it's not easy to do that. There's a reason that we all slid into it's so easy to do those other things. It's taken care of for you. You're actually making a harder choice, but knowing every significant progress that I've made up to this point, like the difference between me now and me 3 years ago was not because of Netflix. It was not because of Google Newsfeed. It was not because it was the other time that I spent it. So if you want to have that transformation, you got to spend more time in that inner workplace. That's kind of where I'm at now. So I recognize that, man, look how far I got and how much inefficiency was left. That's great. But if I'm saying I'm not getting my results fast enough, maybe it's because I need to spend more time in the intentional place. It's just when you're doing a diet, we start by getting rid of and I use the word diet, intentionally, unintentionally there, but most of us, when we're starting a health journey, we start a diet. It takes us several iterations to figure out that it has to be a lifestyle. We all start with a diet. And when you're doing a diet, you're like, you pick this one thing that you're going to try to cut, something like that. But after time, after you get results, you're starting to pivot towards more lifestyle. You start applying a more scrutiny to those small things that you never questioned before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the place that I'm at now. And there's just a few of these stragglers that I recognize they're not adding value. It doesn't bring me joy. It doesn't inform me to any significant degree. And that's what I want to leave behind. Because by saying no to that and leaving it open, what possibilities does it open up? That's where I'm at now. And it's a longer way of getting there. But for me, clearly, it's just a few of these straggler drift state activities that I just am doing because it's easy.
That's perfect. I mean, that's even bigger than you probably realize right now, Jonathan, but you all talk about the power of those 1% shifts. So, those 1% shifts of like just not watching that second episode of Netflix when it rolls over, or binging 3-hour episodes a night. Like you do one, you can relax. Watch 2 or 3, then it's something else, So making those little shifts compounded over 365 days of next year will make a meaningful difference.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that we're not saying, and Jonathan, you're not certainly saying like you need to be productive and moving forward 16 hours a day. That's not a life in balance. To Dom's point, you're allowed to stop and smell the roses and watch a show on Netflix or read a book or do it. Like you're not arguing the opposite. It's that drift state. That's clearly what we're talking about. Is like, don't get into that point of I'm just drifting. And then one episode turns into 7, where I think you've said before, like you're on the couch eating a bag of Cheetos and you don't know where it all went, right? Like that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. No, you're right. You are right. But I will say that is actually a struggle for me because so much happens when I'm in an intentional place and I do get my dopamine hits from other things now. Those wins that you just described can be their own form of addiction, and actually stopping to smell the roses at some point may present the next version of the challenge for 2021. Yes, you did it. You accomplished all your goals. You crushed everything that you set out, but you still can't stop. Why are you so driven? It's more like you've cultivated demons that are just keeping you maniacally focused on a goal that doesn't matter. So you're right to point that out, Brad, that it's about moderation. I do think that will be the 2021 goal. Every goal I've set up, I've crushed. But why am I still operating like there's a cheetah chasing me? Why can't I slow down? And it's not that I want to go back to Netflix. That isn't there. But the whole point, the whole stated goal for someone pursuing financial independence was to have more time. Now you have it, but you've been caught up in this loop that has nothing to do with your stated goals. That's not like something to blow by, because I recognize that's the danger for me probably next year.
I see that a lot, Jonathan, in high performers is, you trade in one form of compulsion for a higher version of compulsion, which is like productivity and achievement and making a difference and making more money, building, having an impact, those kinds of things. And at the root of it, there's still that and I have a lot of this too. I can see it because I have this, is that discomfort of just like sitting still with myself and being able to just relax. I've gotten much better at it. And actually it was when I set the intention, this is interesting, Jonathan, when I set the intention to bring excellence into my recovery. You know what I mean? Like if I was going to recover excellently, how would I watch TV? Like the TV, like one episode actually does help me to close down my mind, and it gives my imagination a thing. Like if I'm going to sleep excellently, what does that look like? If I'm going to take an excellent 15-minute meditation break, if I'm going to have an excellent Saturday off. So there's an excellence to it. And oftentimes it's like, I judge it by how do I feel, not by what I'm doing. And that's a big shift. So I just throw that out there as a potential for you, because I can totally feel you on so many levels, man, on that one. All right, you guys ready to look forward to this next year?
That sounds good.
Well, then I would say as we look forward to this next year, one of the things that you're going to want to ask yourself is, in this look back that you just did, like, what do you want to carry forward with you to this next year? And Jonathan, with you, it's about those relationships that you built, that self-confidence. And we just talked about like, what's this new focus on like recovery, or whatever word you would have for it, like being able to find like a sense of inner peace, whatever those things are that you would want to bring into this next year. Brad, that togetherness that you talked about and the clarity, making that really intentional to bring that in as themes for next year. And if I were to give you space and time to think about that, I would ask you to journal about like what tangible forms could those take? And, using your language, like what's one thing that you could do to add to next year that would make sure that, Brad, togetherness is a theme, or Jonathan, relationships are a theme for next year. And so I'm not going to ask you to put you on the spot for that, but this is like what your listeners can think about. The bigger question And this is like kind of like the big thing for you to focus on for the next year is, there's one big question, and I'll give you some other things to clarify it. What is an area of your life that is ready for the next big level up? Chances are it's not going to come to you right away. So if you're doing this exercise at home, the way I would encourage you is to just start writing many of the areas of your life that are ready for a level up. Okay, my physical fitness, okay, FI, okay, my love life, like start writing down some of those areas that feel like you built some momentum and it's ready for the next level up. And after you've written down a list of 3, 5, 15, look at the one that like kind of jumps off the page at you. You feel like a fire at the belly. Maybe it takes combining 2 of those things. It could be, okay, well, maybe it's my state of mindfulness and my relationship, because those 2 things are interconnected. If I can get those together, then wow, okay, that could be a really big year for me. And guys, I just want to remind you that this still falls under the umbrella of, if the next year of your life could be the most meaningful, fulfilling, prosperous year of your life, then what could go down for you next year? And I don't think a lot of people are thinking big enough about that. I think we're all kind of thinking we're coming off this terrible year, and many people classify it as a hard, terrible year. But what if next year, like what if this was the springboard to the best year of your life, and however you determine that? And if you are willing to believe that that's a possibility, then what is that area of your life that is ready for that next big level up? And for me, I'll go into my life because I could see you guys thinking it requires a little bit of thought. I have this mission that I talk about on the podcast, the Great Man Within podcast, where I say, I have a mission over this next 10 years to help 10 million men live their fullest potential, right? To be better fathers, husbands, community leaders, friends. And I've had that mission for about a year now. And as I look at the community that I've built over this past year, it's small, but it's strong. And the next year of my life is about like, how do I blow out that community? And for me, the one word that keeps coming up over and over again is courage, right? Courage is now my one word theme for the next year regarding how do I get out there? How do I attract more men? How do I run experiences for guys that can come together and meet one another and go on journeys where they feel like, okay, I can work on my personal development, my inner work together with other men. It's going to require me to be bold. I had to shut down all my corporate work this year. That requires courage to set myself up for next year, short-term bump in income. That's the biggest area of my life that I'm going all in on, fellas, because I believe that next year has the potential to be the most meaningful, fulfilling, and prosperous year of my life. So I'll pause here and I'll just see, has anything bubbled up for either one of you about, if next year, if I was really going to dream big, what would be an area of my life that I would really want to blow out?
Yeah, that's interesting, Dom, because obviously you're talking about, really big, and your example was 10 million men. And I mean, that's huge impact. But I do want to ask just a clarifying question, and really for the audience, is like, this doesn't mean everybody doing this exercise needs to come up with something that's going to have a world-changing difference. No. It's just something big in whatever sphere of their life that would be big, right? Like just to say like, hey, I want to be the best husband or the best wife or the best parent or the best friend or whatever. Like, I mean, that could be an answer, right?
100%. It could be, I want to get in shape where I feel in love with my body. It could be, I want to have mornings and evenings, my morning and evening routines where it feels like I wake up with an intentionality, go to bed with intentionality, so that every single day I live with presence. It could be whatever thing that makes you feel like I'm inspired to see what I'm capable of next year. Like I'm going to amaze myself over this next year with how I'm going to show up, either in my relationship or for myself or for my kids or for my financial independence journey. Like, what is one area of your life that you can really light up? And then when you come up with something like that, that's where, again, going back to how you guys break it down into like, what's that next step that you can commit to? Going back a few years, like one of my things that I looked at was I've been wanting to call in, a relationship into my life. And I had to look at some areas of my life where I was blocking like a romantic relationship. So I said, this next year of my life is really going to be about like opening my heart and getting coaching around that. So I ended up investing in a program that was a 9-month-long program that spanned the entirety of 2019 that gave me accountability and structure and expertise to follow so that I could unwind some of my old dating patterns or some of my own limiting belief systems about my worthiness and these kinds of things. So it started with like a dream of what I wanted for myself. And then I took one action that actually set me up for 9 months of success. It was like one decision I made to sign up for that course. It was a financial commitment and a time commitment, but that one decision basically gave structure to my year, right? That made sure, and it was one of the most transformative years of my life. So I encourage you fellas to think about what that may look like for you, whether it's big or it's small.
Yeah. And you used the word in there, presence. And I think that really struck me because I think this is probably like my biggest like perennial issue is even though I know what I want my days to look like, I still just kind of backslide into the grazing on the computer of, oh, I'll just check my email or I'll check to see if anybody needs me for ChooseFI and, or, whatever, or, right? You just fill in the blanks. And it's that I'm not creating this separation, right? Like I think the same amount of stuff would get done if I just sat down at the computer and said, I'm sitting here for 1 hour and I'm just going to just plow through all this stuff and just be intentional about it, as opposed to that just constant grazing, which frankly makes me a worse person to be around. I mean, I got to be honest. Like, I think, if you ask my wife, like in her heart of hearts, like, what is the biggest thing that I have to work on? I'm clearly putting words in her mouth because this is what I think it is that I can be just simply not present sometimes, even though I'm there in body. My mind is somewhere else. I'm thinking about what I have to do or whatever it may be. And like, that doesn't feel good to me. And I know that I'm not showing up for her the way that I should because I haven't created that separation. I haven't put the structure in place that would make my life better. I know it would, Dom. Like we've talked about this. Like, it's frustrating.
I know. Yes. And so this is a recurring theme that you've had over the past few years too. I mean, we've talked about this at length. And this could be the year, Brad, that like you leave that behind. It could be the year where it's like, I could get really serious about my presence because like, think about this. If you were to do that next year, make a real intentional focus on presence, which could require someone else coming in and providing structure, you becoming a part of a system or some coaching, whatever it is, that could be a down payment for the decades of your life that follow. If you can build an inner foundation of presence in 2021, that is something that it's a rising tide that will lift all boats in your business life, in your inner peace life, in your relationship with your wife, with your kids, everywhere. If you were to really make that decision. And this is where Napoleon Hill's work comes in extra handy, right? Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich, he says, the number one step in creating any meaningful change is to build a burning desire. Not just a desire, a burning desire. The difference between desire and burning desire. Desire is, I should do that. I should be more present. I should lose weight. I should start saving more money. Burning desire is, I must, right? You go from should to must. And when you go to like from should to must, and this is what Napoleon Hill says, it's like the difference between the haves and the have-nots in life is simply the difference between having a desire and a burning desire. Because when you have that white hot heat of desire for whatever it is you want, you will not be stopped ever. So I would encourage you, Brad, is like, can I just stoke the flames of really wanting this presence for my life? And that part of that may mean going super deep into all of the ways that not being present has cost you, whether it's like anger or snapping out, or you know what I mean? Or anything that you feel is substandard, piling that on, and then starting to get clear on what could presence bring me. Talk to guys like Corey Muscara and other people who have like cultivated a deep presence practice and ask them what their life is like, what's possible for you. And then you can make that one decision. James Clear talks about this all the time in Atomic Habits. The one decision you can make that eliminates thousands of future decisions. Like he says, take the TV out of your bedroom. And then those thousands of nights that you go to bed, you don't have to worry about, do I turn on the TV or not? What's that one decision that you can make that would allow all of next year to be focused on presence throughout the 365 days that are there for you?
I think it's interesting for the people inside the financial independence community. Once you're on this path, even marginally on this path, you get a little bit of space and you realize like the space gave us the opportunity to analyze more than our money. We're all here to do better with our money. That's probably why you picked this show. But just getting a couple steps in made you realize this is about life. And there's so much more to life than your net worth. And so I appreciate that challenge. I think all of us kind of have, everyone listening to this, if they were being intellectually honest and went through this exercise, they have a pretty clear sense of where that must needs to come. where they need that burning desire, what to focus on. So I'm hugely grateful for you for just bringing this up as a conversation and allowing us to go into it with such intensity. I think it's going to be wildly helpful for people. And for our audience, like if they wanted to go on this journey a little bit farther, if they wanted some additional resources, if they wanted to connect with you or follow up with you, what would be the best way for them to do that, Dom?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jonathan. So the best way is for all audience members, the Great Man Within podcast. We have a number of different episodes about design the next year of your life, design the next decade of your life. So you can head over to the Great Man Within podcast and anyone can listen to that stuff. For the men specifically, I do a lot of men specific work. Like I mentioned before, this mission of 10 million men on a path of becoming their, the best selves. So if you head over to thegreatmanwithinpodcast.com or greatmanwithinpodcast.com, either one will go to where exactly you need to go. I'm going to be running a 90-minute Design the Next Year of Your Life webinar on December 16th. It's going to be interactive. You get a chance to meet men from around the world who are going to be going through this exercise. We'll have breakout groups. We're going to be doing Zoom breakout group chats so you can go deeper into this work. And then on top of that, I'm going to be running a free men's mental health challenge for the first 30 days of January. And we're going to be doing things like meditation, breath work, cold showers, reading mental health passages that like really set you up for a sturdy foundation. And we have daily emails and accountability, daily text messages if you want to sign up for that, with a group of other men from around the world doing this inner work. So for all of that, just head over to thegreatmanwithin.com and you can register for that 90-minute webinar on designing your future and also that 30-day challenge for men, the mental health challenge starting in January.
Awesome. And I guess, there will be people listening to this even probably middle of next year, catching up, right? So if they're hearing it now, they're like, I wonder what he's going to have there. Will you have maybe a replay or resources available, anything like that for people that want to catch up?
Yeah, right on that same page, you're going to get access to all of our free downloads. So we're going to have guided meditations there, meditations around designing the next year of your life or even the next 10 years of your life. Our top book reading lists, like 18 books every business leader must read, 12 books every man must read, 15 books written by women that we love. So all of those resources are going to be at that page no matter what time you listen to the show.
Awesome. All right. Dominick Quartuccio from greatmanwithin.com. Dom, thanks so much for joining us on the show today.
Thanks, fellas.
All right, my friends, speaking of a burning desire, the fire is spreading. We'll see you next time as we continue to go down the road less traveled.
You've been listening to ChooseFI Radio Podcast, where we help middle-class America build wealth, one life hack at a time.